Desperation in the desert, Corvus clenched his teeth as acrid smoke from the crashed ship stung his eyes and choked his lungs. The unforgiving desert of Terminus Prime stretched out before him, an endless sea of rust-colored dunes offering no quarter to him or his doomed band of Xindi rebels. They had risked everything to escape the ruthless clutches of the Gorn Empire. But now, stranded on this barren hellscape of a planet, with their ship shattered to pieces around them, Corvus feared their desperate gambit had only bought them a crueler death. The twin suns beat down mercilessly on the charred remains of their vessel, and as the heat shimmered across the horizon, hope seemed as distant as the stars themselves. Corvus had always been a fighter. From the time he was a hatchling, he had been taught to resist, to survive against all odds. But here, on Terminus Prime, with his people wounded, their spirits broken, even Corvus felt the icy tendrils of despair creeping into his heart. The Xindi had been a proud race, skilled in both warfare and diplomacy, but years under the oppressive rule of the Gorn had ground them down to a shadow of their former selves. Now they were fugitives, hunted across the galaxy, and this desolate planet seemed destined to be their final resting place. As Corvus scanned the horizon, his compound eyes catching the glint of sunlight off distant dunes, he heard shouts of alarm rise from the other survivors. Spinning around, his hand instinctively reached for the plasma rifle slung across his back. What he saw made him freeze. Cresting a nearby dune was a gleaming silver shape, another ship seemingly human in design. Corvus had heard the stories of humans, of course. Everyone in the galaxy had. They were a young species, brash and unpredictable, hailing from the distant Sol system. Corvus had always dismissed the tales of their audacity and refusal to back down from a fight as mere exaggerations. But now, watching the human ship approach, he felt a flicker of something he had not experienced in a long time. Hope. The human explorers emerged from their wrecked vessel, striding purposefully toward the Xindi crash site. Their strange, pale faces were inscrutable behind tinted visors, and their movements were confident, almost relaxed, as if they had not just survived a crash on a hostile world. Corvus heard the click of weapons being armed behind him as his fellow rebels tensed, preparing for a confrontation. But the human in the lead, a tall man with a shock of auburn hair, simply raised a hand in greeting and called out in passable Xindi, "We come in peace." Corvus hesitated, torn between his instinct to trust these strangers and the grim certainty that doing so would surely spell the rebels' doom. But then the human commander removed his helmet, revealing a face lined with scars and weathered by the depths of space. Looking into the man's eyes, Corvus recognized a kindred spirit, someone used to staring death in the face and spitting in its eye. Slowly, reluctantly, Corvus lowered his weapon and stepped forward to meet the leader of the humans. "I am Corvus, leader of this band of rebels," he said, his voice rough from the desert air. "We flee the tyranny of the Gorn Empire, but I fear we have only traded one cruel fate for another." The human commander nodded, his expression somber. "I am Commander Terry Warren," he replied. "My people spent centuries under the yoke of our own despots before we broke free. Now we seek to forge alliances with other free races. It seems fate has brought us together, Corvus. We are stranded here, same as you, with little hope of rescue." Corvus clenched his fists, the bitter taste of defeat rising in his throat. To have come so far, only to perish on this scorched rock, it was almost too much to bear. But there was something in Terry's voice, a quiet persistence, that made Corvus pause. "I propose an alliance between our people," Terry continued, his gaze unwavering. "If we combine our resources and skills, we stand a far better chance of surviving this ordeal." Corvus looked at the humans arrayed behind Terry, noting the glint of keen intelligence in their eyes, the capable set of their stances. Much as it galled him to admit it, the humans spoke wisdom. Alone, the Xindi rebels were doomed. But with the aid of these humans and their technology, perhaps there was a chance. "Very well," Corvus said at last. "We accept your alliance." He extended his hand, human style, and Terry clasped it firmly. As the two groups set about establishing a camp amid the wreckage of their ships, Corvus watched the humans work with growing respect. They were ingenious and resourceful, adapting to the harsh conditions of Terminus Prime with admirable tenacity. He noticed Terry's second-in-command, a wiry man named Max Donovan, deep in conversation with Lyra, the rebels' chief technician. The two had their heads bent over a tangle of salvaged equipment, working in seamless tandem to repair a portable generator. Corvus felt a spark of hope at the sight. If humans and Xindi could cooperate thus, perhaps there was a chance for them after all. But the trials of Terminus Prime soon began to take their toll. The blistering heat of the days and the bone-numbing cold of the nights wore on human and Xindi alike. Meager rations stretched thinner each day, and sickness crept through the camp like a malevolent specter. Zara, the medic, tended to the ill as best she could, but her supplies dwindled rapidly. Corvus watched helplessly as his people shivered and sweat, gripped by fever. One evening, as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert, Terry approached Corvus, his face grave. "We must retrieve the medical technology from our ship's wreckage," he said. "Without it, the sick will not survive." Corvus nodded grimly. "I will go with you." At Terry's questioning glance, he added, "You risked much in forging this alliance. It is only fitting I share in the danger." As they set out across the dunes, Terminus Prime's baleful suns painting the sands a bloody crimson, Corvus felt an unfamiliar sensation stir in his chest. It took him a moment to place it, respect, perhaps even the seeds of friendship, for the indomitable human at his side. Little did he know that high above, a Gorn scout drone drifted in silent orbit, its sensors fixed on the telltale heat signatures of the wreckage below. It beamed its findings across the void to the Gorn flagship, where a strike force was already being mustered. The rebels' respite on Terminus Prime was drawing to a close, and the fury of the Gorn Empire was about to descend upon them with all the inexorable force of a gathering storm. The Gorn's return. The twin suns of Terminus Prime had barely crested the horizon when Terry and Corvus set out across the endless sea of rust-colored dunes. Their mission was clear: reach the wreckage of the UNSS Melon and retrieve the medical supplies that could save their dying comrades. Terry's boots sank into the shifting sands with each step, the heat already building despite the early hour. He glanced at Corvus, noting the Xindi's tense posture. "How are you holding up?" Terry asked, breaking the silence. Corvus's mandibles clicked softly. "I've survived worse," he replied, his voice measured. "Though I admit your Earth deserts put ours to shame." Terry couldn't help but chuckle, though the sound was grim. "That's the spirit," he said. "We'll get through this, Corvus. One way or another." As they trudged onward, the conversation flowed more freely. Terry found himself opening up about his childhood in the slums of New Detroit, fighting his way out of poverty and into the stars. Corvus listened intently, then shared his own tale of witnessing the Gorn Empire's brutal subjugation of his homeworld. The stories of hardship and resilience forged a bond between them, a mutual understanding that transcended species and backgrounds. "We will free them," Terry said, his voice low and fierce. "Your people and mine, working together." Corvus nodded, a newfound respect gleaming in his compound eyes. Perhaps, he mused, this alliance was meant to be. The day wore on, bringing with it scouring winds that pelted them with stinging sand. They huddled behind a jagged outcropping, shielding their faces from the onslaught. "Some rescue mission," Terry muttered, spitting grit from his mouth. Corvus's laughter was a harsh clicking sound. "Perhaps we should have brought the melon to us instead." When the storm passed, they pressed on. The wreckage of the melon loomed before them, a twisted monument of metal half buried in the dunes. They clambered over scorched bulkheads and shattered viewports, searching for anything that could aid their beleaguered camp. "Here!" Corvus called, lifting a battered medkit from beneath a fallen beam. Terry grinned, hefting a portable stasis unit. This should keep Zara busy for a while. As they gathered the precious supplies, a crackling voice erupted from Terry's communicator. "Terry, Gorn attack! Hurry!" The transmission cut off abruptly. Terry and Corvus locked eyes, a moment of shared dread passing between them. "We have to move!" Corvus growled, already sprinting back the way they'd come. They ran, stumbling through the treacherous terrain, medical gear clutched tight. Every second stretched into eternity as they imagined the horrors unfolding back at the camp. Rounding a towering dune, they skidded to a halt. In the distance, ominous shapes descended from the sky, Gorn dropships bristling with weapons. Terry's grip tightened on the stasis unit. "Looks like we brought more than medical supplies to this fight." Corvus nodded grimly. "Let us hope it's enough." They plunged onward, racing against time and the encroaching Gorn forces. The camp materialized in the distance, a haphazard collection of makeshift structures and salvaged ship parts. Even from afar, they could see the chaos unfolding. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as the defenders mounted a desperate resistance. Zara's voice rang out over the din, directing the placement of barricades and coordinating return fire. The acrid smell of ozone and burning metal assaulted their nostrils as they drew closer. Terry's tactician mind raced, analyzing the battlefield. "We need to draw them away," he shouted to Corvus over the cacophony of battle. "There are canyons to the east, if we can lure them in." Corvus's mandibles clicked in understanding. A trap. They skirted the edge of the firefight, gathering Zayden and a handful of able-bodied fighters. Terry quickly outlined his plan, and soon they were on the move, launching hit-and-run attacks to draw the Gorn troops away from the main camp. The canyons loomed before them, a maze of towering rock formations. Terry had spent the previous day exploring these very passages, and now that knowledge would prove invaluable. As they retreated deeper into the labyrinth, Terry directed his team to plant salvaged explosives at key choke points. The Gorn pursued relentlessly, their scaled forms weaving through the narrow passages. When the last charge was set, Terry gave the signal. The detonations were deafening, sending shockwaves through the canyon and bringing tons of rock crashing down upon the enemy forces. In the silence that followed, broken only by the distant sounds of battle from the camp, Terry surveyed the carnage. The Gorn ranks had been decimated, but he knew the fight was just beginning. "Back to camp," he ordered. "We end this now." They emerged from the canyons to find the situation at the camp hanging by a thread. The defenders were nearly out of ammunition, and the remaining Gorn troops pressed their advantage with a fierce war cry. Terry led the charge, his team crashing into the Gorn's exposed flank, catching them off guard. The battle devolved into brutal close-quarters combat, every inch of ground contested. Terry found himself back-to-back with Corvus, their differences forgotten in the heat of battle. They moved as one, covering each other's blind spots and striking down Gorn soldiers with ruthless efficiency. As the last enemy fell, an eerie quiet settled over the camp. The twin suns of Terminus Prime cast long shadows across the blood-stained sand. Terry's eyes swept over the aftermath, the smoking wreckage, the wounded being tended to by an overworked Zara, the shell-shocked faces of survivors. His gaze fell upon Max, cradling Lyra's limp form. The technician's body was a mass of angry burns, her breathing shallow and labored. "I'm sorry," Max choked out, tears streaming down his face. She pushed me out of the way." Terry placed a comforting hand on Max's shoulder, words failing him. He looked to Corvus and saw the same mix of sorrow and rage reflected in the Xindi's compound eyes. "This cannot stand," Corvus said, his voice low and filled with steel. "The Gorn Empire must pay for what they've done here." Terry nodded, his eyes hardened with determination. "Agreed. But first we need to tend to our wounded and fortify our position. This is far from finished." As the survivors began the grim task of rebuilding, Terry's mind was already racing with plans. The Gorn would be back, and next time they would be ready. The battle for Terminus Prime had only just begun. The escape plan. The acrid stench of plasma burns and spilled blood hung thick in the air as Terry surveyed the aftermath of the battle. Broken bodies littered the ground, both Gorn and Ally alike, while the twin suns of Terminus Prime cast long shadows across the carnage, a grim reminder of the price paid for their survival. Corvus approached, his carapace scored with fresh battle scars, his mandibles clicking with urgency. "We need to talk," Corvus said, his tone leaving no room for delay. Terry nodded, calling over Max, Zayden, and the remaining rebel leaders. They huddled in the wreckage of a downed Gorn dropship, its twisted metal providing a modicum of shelter from the harsh elements. Corvus's compound eyes swept over the assembled group, his voice low and intense. "We cannot win this war through attrition," he began, his gaze locking with each of them in turn. "The Gorn will keep sending forces until we're crushed. Our only hope is to strike at the heart of their empire." Terry's brow furrowed. "What do you propose?" Corvus pulled up a holographic schematic, projecting it onto the shattered hull beside them. "We sabotage their central command nexus," he explained, tracing a path through the hologram with one of his claws. "Sever the chain of command between their leadership and military forces. Without orders, their troops will be disorganized, vulnerable." Skepticism flickered across Terry's face, but as Corvus outlined his plan, a spark of hope ignited in his chest. It was audacious, perhaps even suicidal, but it just might work. Zara, her hands still stained with the blood of those she had treated, spoke up. "I might have a solution," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. "A virus designed to infiltrate and disrupt their command network. But it would require a physical uplink to bypass their cyber defenses." Terry's tactical mind raced, analyzing angles and possibilities. "The orbital command station," he said, realization dawning. "It's our only shot." The next hours were a flurry of activity. Intelligence from Xindi spies was poured over, disguises and falsified codes were procured, an elite strike team was assembled, a mix of human and rebel operatives led by Terry and Corvus themselves. They commandeered a battered freighter, its hold filled with salvaged Gorn tech and their own hidden arsenal. As the ship lifted off from Terminus Prime's scorched surface, Terry felt the weight of their mission settle on his shoulders. The fate of entire worlds hung in the balance. The journey to the heart of Gorn territory was fraught with tension. Each passing patrol ship sent pulses of adrenaline through the crew. When they finally approached the cargo docks of the massive orbital station, Terry's knuckles were white on the control yoke. A harsh voice crackled over the comms. "Freighter Zeta 9, transmit authorization codes and prepare for inspection." Terry exchanged a tense glance with Corvus as he inputted the stolen codes. Seconds stretched into eternity as they waited for a response. Codes verified. "Proceed to Docking Bay 7. A collective exhale rippled through the strike team. They had passed the first hurdle, but the true test was yet to come. As they disembarked, blending in with the bustle of the station's supply depot, Terry activated his subdermal communicator. "Lyra, do you read?" "Loud and clear," came the technician's voice, strained but determined. "I'm patched into the station systems. Ready when you are?" Terry nodded to Corvus, and the team split into two groups. Max and Zayden, guided by Lyra's remote assistance, set off in search of a hardwire uplink terminal. Meanwhile, Terry and Corvus led the others towards the upper command decks, ready to create a distraction. The labyrinthine corridors of the station stretched before them, a maze of potential death and discovery. With each step deeper into enemy territory, the weight of their mission pressed down upon them. The virus was their lifeline, their one chance to turn the tide of this war. As alarms began to blare and the sounds of plasma fire echoed through the station, Terry knew their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. The fate of the galactic realm now rested on a knife's edge, with no guarantee of success or survival. The virus upload completed with a soft chime, barely audible over the chaos erupting around them. Terry's eyes met Corvus's, a moment of shared relief amid the madness. "It's done," Terry breathed, his voice rough with exertion. "Let's move." They sprinted through the corridors of the Gorn command station, alarms blaring and emergency lights bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Plasma bolts sizzled past, leaving scorch marks on the metal walls as they fought their way back to the commandeered freighter. The effects of their sabotage became evident. Gorn troops stumbled in confusion, their coordinated defense crumbling as the virus tore through their command network. The ship lifted off amid a hail of disorganized fire, streaking away from the station and into the vast expanse of space. Terry allowed himself a moment to breathe as the adrenaline began to ebb. "We did it," Zayden said, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and elation. Corvus nodded, his compound eyes gleaming. This is only the beginning. In the days that followed, reports flooded in from across Gorn-controlled space. The virus had spread like wildfire, crippling the Empire's ability to coordinate its forces. Uprisings erupted on a dozen worlds, long-oppressed species seizing the opportunity to strike back against their Gorn overlords. The Alliance's base on Terminus Prime became a hub of frantic activity. Terry found himself poring over star charts and tactical readouts, coordinating with rebel cells across the sector. "Another request for assistance," Lyra announced, her burns still visible, but healing. Xindi freedom fighters on Ether 4 are facing heavy resistance. Terry rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. "We can't be everywhere at once," he muttered. Corvus's mandibles clicked in agreement. "No, but we can choose our targets wisely. We must strike at the Empire's critical infrastructure while they're reeling." A plan began to take shape. Terry assembled strike teams, mixing seasoned human operatives with alien rebels to create versatile, unpredictable units. Xaden, once a hothead, now stood tall as he prepared to lead a raid on a major Gorn munitions depot. Remember, Terry briefed the assault team. "Speed and surprise are our allies. Get in, plant the charges, and get out. We don't have the numbers for a prolonged engagement." As Xaden's team departed, Terry turned his attention to another pressing matter. Intelligence suggested the Gorn were developing new AI weaponry, a potential game-changer if left unchecked. "Lyra," he called, "you're with me on this one. We're going to infiltrate their research station and acquire that data." The technician nodded, dedication etched on her face. "I've got some new toys that might help us bypass their security." As they prepared for their mission, reports trickled in of the Alliance's early successes. Xindi guerrillas had liberated 2 minor colonies, while a daring raid led by Max had captured a Gorn communications array. Yet amid the victories, a shadow loomed. Reports spoke of a Gorn commander named Dravis, whose brutal tactics were slowing the rebellion's advance in key sectors. Terry studied the intelligence reports, a cold feeling settling in his gut. "This Dravis is going to be a problem," he muttered. Corvus nodded grimly. "Then we'll deal with him when the time comes. For now, we focus on our objectives." As Terry boarded the stealth shuttle bound for the Gorn research station, he couldn't shake the feeling that their real challenges were only beginning. The Empire was wounded but far from defeated. The coming battles would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine.